Hi folks, this is Lou Pulse for finally finishing a video that I'd started nearly a year ago. And this is about a convention Odyssey, my 2 weeks away from home in the summer of 2015. In about 5 days I'm going to set off again. And usual caveats, the slides are wordy for people who have impaired hearing or for whom English is not their first language. I expect most people will listen rather than watch. So what's this about? It's about my trip to GenCon and the World Board Gaming Championships in 2015, driving from southeastern North Carolina. Well, no carpool is available, partly because I was going to 2 conventions before getting back home, partly because I was visiting my brother for a few days. I was away from home 2 weeks. GenCon is 650 miles from my home, so I stopped in Charleston, West Virginia for the night and arrived in Indianapolis in the afternoon the next day, Wednesday. Well, each year I stay at a hotel 6 to 10 miles from the Indiana Convention Center near the Ring Road. I drive in each day and park in a parking deck and then walk about a mile. And I found one that's less than $10 or $10 itself before 9 a.m. The rooms in downtown hotels are $200 plus taxes. Mine was $50 to $60 including taxes. Now, if you have a group that can share a room, you can get the cost down. Of course, that depends on whether you've flown in or driven in. You know, a lot of times when you stay in a hotel, they charge you quite a bit for taking care of your car. Also, the downtown hotels tend to get booked in minutes, not a few hours or a few days, minutes. So you can't rely on getting one. Well, I'd never come into downtown Indianapolis on Wednesday before, and I thought I might avoid a big line by coming Wednesday and picking up my tickets then. Well, I drove in, the city was swarming with gamers, which are easy to recognize. And in the convention center, there was a humongous will call line for the tickets, much longer than it was Thursday morning, as it turned out. So I spent a long time waiting in line. Fortunately, I was able to read the convention book while I was waiting. Now, I'd pre-registered for a lot of free events, seminars. I don't go to conventions to play games generally. Playing the games usually costs money. I ended up not going to many of the seminars I had tickets for because I was busy doing other things, and I went to some that I didn't have tickets for. Unless there's not enough seats, which is very rare, you can get in without a ticket. I also had 4 of my own seminars to do, one each day. This takes quite a bit of time, although the actual time slots are just an hour. And these are a good way to advertise my book, Game Design, and my audiovisual classes. My publisher, McFarland, happens to come to GenCon, even though they're from North Carolina like I am, and they sold out the copies of my book that they brought along. Some year, I might try doing a non-free workshop, since I used to teach game design, as a way to recoup a little of the convention costs. What about food? Well, there's lots of restaurants in central Indianapolis, but you likely need a reservation. The town center is hopping all the time. It's very alive, unlike the centers of many smaller cities. There's also a huge gathering of food trucks outside the ICC during the day. I don't use the trucks though. I like to eat chicken tenders and chips, fries, in the exhibit halls. Save myself the trip. I use restaurants near my motel for breakfast. In the evenings, lots of Bob Evans Cobb salad. I'm diabetic. I don't stay up late at cons, certainly not at GenCon. And I get up early, so the restaurant's still open when I drive back to the motel. So I based myself at the McFarland booth where I could drop things off. I was carrying the Sea Kings production proof. It was the only copy of Sea Kings in the country at the time because it was still on a boat. And I had a bigger load than usual. I also had prototypes that I was going to show publishers. The exhibit hall is enormous. and it's easy to miss something. I visited the GameCrafter booth at one point, and then another day I tried to go back and I didn't have the con book map with me. I couldn't find them. It is really big. Much bigger, I'd say, than a football field. So much of my time was spent going around all the exhibits. I attended lots of seminars and panels, conducted my own, spent a lot of time with a publisher I hadn't met before, showed games to AEG and to Catalyst after introducing myself, and so forth. And I talked with Lisa Camp, who's the managing editor of McFarland, about books at the McFarland booth. At one point I stumbled onto somebody from Chapel Hill who is a co-owner of This and That Games, Eugene Shenderoff, who'd gone in with someone else at the other guy's booth. I attended many of the fiction writers' seminars, yet not a single industry insider panel. They just didn't seem to be offering me much, whereas the fiction writers ones are interesting, even though I'll never write any fiction to speak of. But my wife is interested in it, so I kind of attend for her. And I left Indianapolis after my Sunday morning seminar because I had a 550-mile drive to my brother's in D.C. Now, one year I drove home rather than to my brother's. I spent the night in Charleston again, so I was able to stay at the con until the exhibit hall shut down at 4. As with most American conventions, the conventions really die on Sunday, and especially Sunday evening. It's done. So I drove all the way across Ohio on a Sunday with people blasting by me at speeds far above the speed limit, and I never saw any police. I get to the mountains as it gets dark, and there's a lot of crazy people driving in the mountains, but I made it to my brother's and stayed a few days. Well, WBC is more than a week long, and it actually started before GenCon ended. So I attended 4 or 5 days. WBC is also a much smaller convention, like 1,700 people versus 60,000 plus. It's also much more family-oriented and more relaxed, even though it's tournament-oriented, unlike GenCon, most of GenCon. In 2015, it was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In 2016, it shifts to Seven Springs, Maryland, a sort of remote resort, which will be an interesting change. So at WBC, I had a talk on Thursday evening, and I had about a dozen people, but I had 2 hours, which is much nicer. Other times, I've tried Friday, and I get more people, but then I only have 1 hour because the room has to be used for other things. The vendors are only available on Friday through Sunday, about 10 to 6. So on Friday, I talked with many of the publishers. I tend to watch the heats of the Britannia tournament and the semifinals and the finals. I managed to get some people to play a version of Epic Britannia, 3rd edition Britannia. Saturday I had dinner with the Academy guys and I went to their talk, and sort of a running joke, Uwe tended to call me Ed for some reason rather than Lou. I brought some blocks. That's about the only purchase I made because I don't buy games, because I don't play games except for my own when they're prototypes. And I saw other people, related publishers like Jeff Billings, Keith of Hex War, and Ed from Clash of Arms. And then on Sunday, I drove back to D.C., visited my brother and sister-in-law for a few days, and finally came home. Something more than 1,800 miles driven altogether. And of course I got home with lots of con-generated work to do when I got there. And in a few days I'll be off on another Odyssey. This time I'm also going to visit my sister in Michigan, so I'll be driving even farther. Thanks for listening.